I slept with my boss to save my job after he threatened to fire me, but then his wife hired me as her personal assistant for revenge. Let me start by saying that none of this was supposed to happen. None of it. If you'd told me 6 months ago where I'd be now, I would have laughed in your face. Hell, I wouldn't have believed me either. But here we are. And trust me, if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It started like any other day at work, mundane, predictable, boring even. You know how it goes. Coffee runs, emails piling up faster than you can answer them, meetings about meetings, blah blah blah. The usual grind. At the time, I thought my biggest problem was figuring out whether I wanted chicken or beef for lunch. Little did I know, that same afternoon would spiral into something straight out of an HR nightmare. My boss, let's call him Mark, not his real name, obviously, had always been intense. He wasn't the kind of guy who screamed or threw tantrums, no, he was more calculated than that. Subtle threats wrapped in compliments, passive-aggressive comments disguised as feedback, it was his MO. Honestly, most people didn't notice because they were too busy trying to stay under his radar. But me? Oh, I noticed. Loud and clear. At first, it was small stuff. Things like, "You're doing great, but maybe try being a little quicker with those reports." Or, "I appreciate your effort, but sometimes consistency matters more than creativity." Nothing outright alarming, right? Just enough to plant seeds of doubt in your head. Seeds that grow over time until you're second-guessing every move you make. That's exactly what happened to me. But then came the escalation. Slowly but surely, the comments got sharper. More pointed. One-on-one meetings turned into interrogations. Deadlines became impossible to meet, not because they were unreasonable, but because he kept moving the goalposts. It felt like no matter what I did, it was never good enough. And honestly, I tried. God, I tried so hard. Extra hours, skipped lunches, weekends spent glued to my laptop, all for what? To prove myself to someone who clearly didn't give a damn. Then, one day, everything changed. We were alone in his office after hours, no witnesses, no escape, and he dropped the bombshell. "Your performance hasn't been great lately," he said, leaning back in his chair like some smug predator sizing up its prey. "Maybe we can fix that." Fix it? Fix it? What the hell does that even mean? My brain scrambled to process what he was implying, but deep down, I already knew. This wasn't about performance reviews or improvement plans anymore. This was about control. Power. Fear. Looking back, I asked myself, was it my fault for not speaking up sooner? For letting things get this far? Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Not even close. Because here's the thing, when you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, survival instinct kicks in. Fight or flight. Except in this case, fighting meant risking everything, my job, my reputation, my livelihood. And flying? Well, that wasn't exactly an option either. So yeah, maybe I should have gone to HR earlier. Maybe I should have documented every snide comment, every impossible deadline, every veiled threat. But hindsight's 20/20, isn't it? All I knew at the time was that I needed to survive. To keep my head above water just long enough to figure out my next move. Little did I know, surviving was only the beginning. You think you know what office politics are, until you're staring down the barrel of unemployment. Trust me, friends, you don't want to find yourself in this position. Ever. There I was, minding my own business, or at least trying to, when Mark asked me to stay late after everyone else had left. At first, I didn't think much of it. He'd done this before, right? Those catch-up meetings that always ended with some vague critique about how I could improve or do better. But something felt off this time. Maybe it was the way he closed his office door behind him, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. Or maybe it was the look in his eyes, cold, calculating, like he was sizing me up for something bigger than a performance review. No witnesses. No escape. Just me and him in that suffocating little room, lit only by the harsh glow of his desk lamp. My stomach churned as I sat down across from him, clutching the edge of my chair like it might save me if things went sideways. Spoiler, they did. He leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that screams, "I'm important," and stared at me for a beat too long. Then he said it. The words that still haunt me to this day, your performance hasn't been great lately. Maybe we can fix that. Fix it. There it was again. That loaded phrase wrapped in innuendo, dangling over my head like a guillotine. My brain scrambled to decode what he really meant. Was he talking about work? About me? Because let's be real, this wasn't about spreadsheets or missed deadlines anymore. This was about power. Control. Fear. And then it hit me, he wasn't asking. He was telling. Giving me an ultimatum without actually saying the words out loud. Either play along, or pack my bags. Simple as that. Now, here's the thing, what would you do in that situation? Seriously, take a second and think about it. When survival feels like betrayal, how far would you go to protect yourself? Would you walk away and risk losing everything, your job, your stability, your future? Or would you swallow your pride and play the game, hoping against hope that it wouldn't cost you more than you were willing to give? For me, the choice wasn't clear-cut. It never is when you're backed into a corner. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to stand up and walk out, consequences be damned. But reality has a funny way of tempering idealism. Rent doesn't pay itself. Bills don't magically disappear. And let's not forget the crushing weight of student loans hanging over my head like a dark cloud. Walking away wasn't just impractical, it was impossible. So yeah, I stayed. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't see another way out. Looking back, I wonder if I made the wrong call. Did I let fear dictate my actions? Probably. But in that moment, all I cared about was surviving. Getting through the night. Figuring out the rest later. Because sometimes, survival isn't noble. Sometimes, it's messy and ugly and leaves scars you can't see. And sometimes, it changes everything. When survival feels like betrayal, how far would you go to protect yourself? If you've ever been in a situation like mine, you already know the answer. If you haven't, well, count yourself lucky. After that ultimatum, those loaded words from Mark, I was left reeling. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, trying to process what had just happened. Was this really my life now? Was I seriously being forced into some kind of twisted bargain just to keep a roof over my head? It didn't feel real. None of it did. But here's the thing about reality, it doesn't care how you feel. It just keeps moving forward, dragging you along whether you're ready or not. What happened next was messy. Complicated. Something I never planned for, not in a million years. After that meeting, Mark made it clear he wasn't going to let me off the hook easily. He kept dropping hints, making comments that walked the line between professional and predatory. And then, one night, he crossed it completely. It started innocently enough, or at least, as innocent as anything involving him could be. He asked me to stay late again, said there were some files we needed to go over. I should have known better. I did know better. But fear has a way of clouding your judgment, doesn't it? It whispers lies in your ear, convincing you that playing along is safer than pushing back. So I stayed. Things escalated quickly. Too quickly. One minute we were sitting across from each other, pretending to review documents, and the next, well, let's just say boundaries disappeared faster than I thought possible. Did I have a choice? Honestly, I don't even know anymore. In the moment, it felt like I didn't. Like I was backed into a corner with no way out. Either give him what he wanted, or risk losing everything. My job. My stability. My future. But here's the kicker, even though I told myself it was survival, it didn't feel like surviving. It felt like drowning. Like I was watching myself make decisions I'd regret for the rest of my life, powerless to stop them. Some decisions don't feel like choices, they feel like traps. And that night? That was the biggest trap of all. Looking back, I wonder if I could have done something differently. Should I have stood up to him, consequences be damned? Or was staying quiet the only option I had? These are questions I'll probably never answer, not fully, anyway. Because hindsight isn't just 20/20, it's also cruel. It shows you every mistake, every misstep, every moment where you wish you'd been stronger, braver, smarter. That night changed everything. Not just my relationship with Mark, but with myself. It left scars, ones I'm still learning to live with. And while I can't undo what happened, I can tell you this, no one should ever have to face something like that. Ever. Some decisions don't feel like choices, they feel like traps. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt trapped, like your options were stripped away piece by piece, you already know how suffocating it can be. If you haven't, consider yourself lucky. Because trust me, it's a feeling you don't forget, even when you wish you could. Update 2. I slept with my boss to save my job after he threatened to fire me, but then his wife hired me as her personal assistant for revenge. Her name was Claire, Mark's wife, and she showed up out of nowhere like a storm cloud rolling in on an already dark day. At first glance, she seemed normal. Polished, put together, the kind of woman who probably had a skincare routine that cost more than my rent. But beneath the surface? Pure chaos waiting to happen. It started with a casual email, a meeting request, nothing alarming about it. I figured it was some kind of HR follow-up or maybe even Mark sending her to clean up his mess, because heaven forbid he handle anything himself. So I went, expecting the usual corporate nonsense. What I got instead was something straight out of a soap opera. She didn't fire me. Nope. Instead, she offered me a job, as her personal assistant. Cue the record scratch. Why would she do that? Simple, revenge. Turns out, Claire wasn't exactly oblivious to what her husband had been up to. In fact, she knew everything, and then some. Hiring me wasn't about helping me, it was about using me as a pawn in her own twisted game of payback. Suddenly, I found myself caught between two powerful people who both wanted to control me, but for very different reasons. Mark saw me as disposable, someone he could manipulate and discard without a second thought. Claire, on the other hand, saw me as leverage, a way to dig deeper into his secrets and make him pay for every lie, every betrayal. Neither option sounded particularly appealing, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, right? The thing about Claire is that she was good, scarily good, at playing the long game. Her smile said ally, but her eyes screamed enemy. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing when one wrong step might blow everything apart. She'd drop cryptic comments here and there, little breadcrumbs designed to keep me guessing. Was she testing me? Sizing me up? Trying to figure out how much damage I could do if push came to shove? Honestly, I still don't know. What made it worse was the guilt. Here I was, working directly under the woman whose marriage I'd inadvertently helped destroy. Sure, none of this was my fault, not really, but try telling that to your conscience at 3 a.m. when you're staring at the ceiling again. Every task she gave me felt loaded, every glance heavy with unspoken meaning. It was exhausting. And yet, weirdly enough, part of me couldn't help but admire her. Don't get me wrong, Claire wasn't some misunderstood hero. She was calculating, ruthless, and absolutely terrifying when she wanted to be. But she also knew how to play the game better than anyone else. Watching her work was like watching a master chess player strategize 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still figuring out which piece to move. Looking back, I realize now that this was the moment things truly spiraled out of control. Before Claire entered the picture, I thought I was dealing with one monster. Now? I was stuck between two, and neither of them cared whether I survived the fallout. From day one, I knew she wasn't going to make this easy on me. Claire had a way of turning even the simplest tasks into psychological warfare. Need me to book a flight? Sure, but only after sending 3 follow-up emails with gentle reminders that came across less like reminders and more like veiled threats. Want me to pick up her dry cleaning? Great, but not before casually mentioning how unreliable assistants tend to find themselves replaced. Passive-aggressive much? Oh, absolutely. And then there were the cryptic messages. She'd drop little hints during conversations, things like, trust is such a fragile thing, or, people always underestimate how much you can learn just by paying attention. At first, I thought she was testing me, trying to see if I'd slip up and reveal something about Mark. But over time, I realized it wasn't just about him, it was about control. She wanted me second-guessing every word I said, every decision I made. Walking on eggshells doesn't even begin to cover it. More like stepping into quicksand, you think you're moving forward, but really, you're sinking deeper with every step. But here's the twist, and trust me, I didn't see this coming either. For all her manipulation and mind games, Claire wasn't the villain I expected her to be. Don't get me wrong, she was still terrifyingly good at playing people like chess pieces. But as time went on, I started noticing cracks in her armor. Moments when the mask slipped, and I caught glimpses of someone who wasn't so different from me, a woman stuck in a bad situation, fighting back the only way she knew how. One day, we were alone in her office, and she handed me a stack of documents to file. As I turned to leave, she said something that stopped me cold. "You don't deserve any of this, you know." Her voice was softer than usual, almost vulnerable. For a split second, I saw past the polished exterior to the person underneath, the one who'd been hurt, betrayed, and left picking up the pieces. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it humanized her in a way I hadn't anticipated. That moment changed something between us, or maybe just within me. Suddenly, I wasn't sure who my real enemy was anymore. Was it Claire, using me as part of her revenge plan? Or was it Mark, whose actions had set this whole nightmare in motion? Either way, I found myself leaning on her in ways I never thought possible. Not because I trusted her completely, but because sometimes, the person you least expect becomes your only ally. Looking back, working for Claire was exhausting, infuriating, and occasionally enlightening. She taught me a lot about survival, not just in the workplace, but in life itself. And while I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, I can't deny it shaped me in ways I'm still unpacking. So, working for Claire wasn't just about running errands or filing papers. No, she had bigger plans for me. Plans that involved digging up dirt on Mark. At first, I didn't realize how deep we were going to go. I figured it'd be some petty revenge scheme, maybe embarrassing him in front of his colleagues or making sure he looked bad during a meeting. But oh no, Claire was playing for keeps. Her revenge plan wasn't just about hurting him, it was about exposing his darkest secrets. And guess who ended up holding all the cards? Yeah, me. It started innocently enough, or at least, as innocent as anything involving Claire ever was. She'd asked me to check emails on her laptop while she stepped out of the room. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then one day, curiosity got the better of me. I opened an email thread between her and someone else, a private investigator, apparently, and suddenly, my jaw hit the floor. There were screenshots of texts, late-night phone calls, even bank statements showing transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. My stomach churned as I scrolled through everything. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a web of lies so tangled it made my head spin. And here's the kicker, none of these secrets belonged to Claire. They belonged to Mark. Turns out, he'd been living a double life for years, cheating not just emotionally but financially too. Fake business deals, shady investments, secret meetings with people whose names I couldn't pronounce. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Claire wasn't just trying to hurt him, she was trying to destroy him. Publicly. Completely. But here's the thing, as much as I hated being caught in the middle, I couldn't deny the power shift happening right under my nose. Every piece of evidence I found gave me leverage, not just over Mark, but over both of them. Suddenly, I wasn't just a pawn in their twisted game anymore. I was the queen. The person who knew too much. And trust me, when you're holding someone's secrets, they start treating you very differently. Still, it wasn't without its cost. Knowing what I knew weighed heavily on me. It felt like carrying around a backpack full of bricks, knowing that one wrong move could bring the whole house of cards crashing down, including mine. Because let's be real, in this game of lies, even the truth has its price. Looking back, I realize now that uncovering those secrets changed everything. Not just for them, but for me too. For the first time, I understood the kind of power information holds, and how dangerous it can be when it falls into the wrong hands. Or maybe, the right ones. Update 3. I slept with my boss to save my job after he threatened to fire me, but then his wife hired me as her personal assistant for revenge. When the dust finally settled, and trust me, it took a while, I realized something important: revenge isn't sweet. Not even close. It's messy, ugly, and unforgettable. Sure, Claire got what she wanted, or at least, most of it. The truth came out in spectacular fashion, blowing up Mark's carefully constructed facade like a house of cards. His shady deals, his lies, his infidelity, it all hit the fan in one explosive reveal that left everyone reeling. But here's the thing about revenge, it doesn't just destroy the target. It leaves collateral damage everywhere. And guess who was standing right in the blast radius? Me. Again. Because apparently, karma has a sick sense of humor. Did I survive intact? Physically, sure. Emotionally? Not so much. Looking back, I can see now how much of myself I lost along the way. My sense of self-worth, my ability to trust people, my faith in doing the right thing, it all took a beating. There were nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made the wrong call staying involved, if walking away would have been better than playing both sides of this toxic game. But then I'd remind myself, walking away wasn't an option. Not for me. Not with rent due and bills piling up and no safety net to catch me if I fell. The final confrontation was intense. Like, I need a drink after typing this, intense. It happened in Claire's office, fitting, since that's where so much of this drama began. Mark showed up unannounced, furious and desperate, demanding answers about how everything had unraveled so quickly. Claire, ever the master manipulator, didn't flinch. She just leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and smiled, a cold, satisfied smirk that sent chills down my spine. Then she dropped the bombshell, all those secrets. Every last one of them had already been leaked to the board, the press, and anyone else who mattered. Watching him crumble was surreal. One minute he was yelling, accusing us both of betrayal, and the next he was silent, defeated. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered everything he'd put me through, the ultimatums, the manipulation, the night I'll never forget, and any sympathy evaporated. And me? Well, I didn't exactly come out on top either. Yeah, I survived. But survival doesn't mean winning. Sometimes, it just means living long enough to pick up the pieces. By the time it was over, I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I felt like I'd aged 10 years in 6 months, and honestly, I wasn't sure I'd ever recover. I should have spoken up sooner. Like, way sooner. When Mark started dropping those passive-aggressive comments and setting impossible expectations, I convinced myself it was easier to just keep my head down and hope it would blow over. It didn't. Toxic workplaces thrive on silence, on people too scared or unsure to call out bad behavior. By staying quiet, I let him think he had all the power. And guess what? He did, for a while, at least. But here's the thing, speaking up doesn't always mean marching into HR or confronting someone directly, though props to anyone brave enough to do that. Sometimes, it's about trusting your gut and getting out before things escalate. Would I have walked away if I'd known how bad it would get? Absolutely. No job is worth losing pieces of yourself, not your dignity, not your sanity, not your self-respect. So, lesson number 1, don't wait until survival feels like betrayal. Get out while you still can. Now, for anyone reading this who might be stuck in a similar situation, here's my advice, document everything. Seriously. Emails, texts, weird interactions, write them down. You never know when you'll need proof that something happened. And don't fall into the trap of thinking you're imagining things or blowing things out of proportion. Gaslighting is real, and manipulative people are really good at making you doubt yourself. Trust your instincts. They're sharper than you think. Closure isn't always clean, but it's necessary. For months after everything went down, I kept replaying moments in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. Did I make the right call staying involved with Claire? Should I have walked away from both of them sooner? The truth is, there's no perfect answer. Sometimes surviving means making messy, imperfect decisions. And yeah, it sucks. But surviving doesn't mean winning. Sometimes, it just means living to tell the story. Looking back now, I realize how much of myself I lost along the way. My confidence, my ability to trust people, even my sense of right and wrong, it all took a hit. But slowly, painfully, I'm piecing myself back together. Because as ugly as this whole experience was, it taught me something important: life is too short to stay in situations that break you. After everything went down, I did what any sane person would do, I quit. Not just the job, but the entire toxic environment that had swallowed me whole. It wasn't easy. Walking away meant starting over from scratch, piecing together a new life without much of a safety net. But you know what? It was worth it. These days, I'm working somewhere smaller, quieter, somewhere where my worth isn't measured by how many hours I can grind or how well I play office politics. Am I happy? Some days more than others. But at least now I feel like I'm building something real instead of running on a treadmill going nowhere fast. As for Mark, well, let's just say karma hit him harder than he ever saw coming. Once Claire exposed his secrets, the shady deals, the infidelity, the lies, he didn't last long in the company. The board ousted him within weeks, and rumors swirled about lawsuits and settlements that tanked whatever reputation he had left. Last I heard, he was trying to start over in another city, but good luck with that. When your name is mud, people remember. Still, part of me almost feels sorry for him. Almost. Because no matter how bad things got for me, they were probably worse for him, and maybe that's poetic justice, but it doesn't make it pretty. Claire, on the other hand, disappeared from my radar almost as quickly as she entered it. She stayed married to Mark, at least publicly, but their relationship became one of those cold, transactional partnerships that exist only on paper. Word around town was that she kept her own money separate, traveled constantly, and lived her life like she didn't need anyone else. Honestly, I think she won in the end, not because she destroyed him, but because she proved she could survive anything. Even herself. And then there's me again, still picking up the pieces, still learning how to forgive not just them, but also myself. Forgiveness isn't easy, especially when the wounds run so deep. But redemption? That's possible. Moving forward means accepting that the past will always be part of me, but it doesn't have to control me. The past may shape us, but it doesn't define us, unless we let it. Looking back, I realize now that none of us escaped unchanged. We all carry scars, some visible, some hidden, but we choose whether to let them hold us back or push us forward. For me, moving on meant finding closure in small ways, journaling, therapy, even baking bread. Seriously, try it sometime, it's oddly therapeutic. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.